My name is Akosh. I'm the CEO of Airtime, which is an autonomous discovery platform turning customer calls into product insights. And let me say a few words about Büşra. We're going to talk about building products lacking essential data and insights, and which can even happen at companies like Doodle. So not just small companies and early stage startups, large companies sometimes face this situation as well. She has immense product management experience, over 10 years on the operational level, as well as on the management level. In the last few years, she's been an amazing product trainer and coach. I'll let her talk more about her. Büşra, let's kick things off. I'm grateful that you accepted my invitation. I'm very happy that you're here with us. Tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation very first, right? So thank you for wanting to listening to me, let's say. Yeah, so as you mentioned, you actually said the most important things. I've been a hands-on product manager and leader for like 10 years or more. I actually started before I finished the university, started my career in classic product management at a telecommunication company. I had 2 telecommunication companies, and then moved to the digital space like very early in my career, which was a completely different world, to be very honest. And then within the digital space, I moved from so my first digital company was home24 in Berlin. And then from there to an agency, from there to a Swiss marketplace startup. And then I moved to Doodle. This is how I ended up there. So as my first software as a service product in the productivity space. And after that, I started my self-employment, which took me also some ways through interim product stuff down to now for a while now as a product management trainer, an educator and coach in mainly product discovery and validation. That's me in a nutshell, actually. Oh, and I'm Berliner. Actually, therefore, apologies to anyone who feels like me being pretty direct is just the way I am. And for my long time followers, they know that for some time I had the tag no bullshit product management trainer, and that is because I'm a Berliner and I just can't do any different.
That's amazing. I'm a Berliner too, I have to admit. I moved here 10 years ago. It took me a while to get used to the directness of communication here, but I think for tonight it's going to be extremely valuable because we want to get to the root of the topics. And let's just jump into your Doodle experience, because it's something that I find extremely exciting when I looked at all the places that you worked at. You started at Doodle back in 2017, if I'm not mistaken, and already at that time, Doodle had millions of users. Maybe in the very beginning, I think most people know what Doodle is, but could you share, like in a few sentences, what Doodle is about and what it tries to achieve?
Sure. So Doodle is in the productivity space, as I mentioned, and it's a scheduling tool. Classic Doodle, as we know it, is a time polling tool where a group of people can find the best time to meet, the best meaning, the time for the majority of the group that works for the majority of the group, that would be the best time to meet. And that moved into the scheduling space and meeting space, basically.
Cool. And you were a lead PM here, and at one point in time in 2017, and I don't want to do any spoilers here, so I try to choose my words very carefully, but you found yourself in a situation where you had to iterate and partially rebuild a part of Doodle's product and the user journey. And when you found yourself in this situation, you also noticed that you don't really have the data and the insights to get started there. Can you tell us the story, how you got into this situation?
Sure. Actually, this is super funny. I have a I have a lean startup background as well, like business model innovation, lean startup. I've been trying to use data wherever I could, like in my career, coming from classic product management, right? And then I started at this company, which was like Doodle, right? So and I'm still in love with Doodle. And then I had this image of Doodle being super product oriented, as in like customer centric, market driven, and so on and so forth. And then I started, and 1 month before I started, our new CPO back then, Jack Berglund, had started. And he also has a lean startup background. And in lean startup, it's important that you measure stuff, right? You measure to learn from it. So you do something and learn what happens, right? Which is the short version of it. It's actually more. And then we are looking at it and we're like, shit, we don't have any data. So the funny thing was that the founders decided back then to not track anything, except of maybe like the most important pieces, which is, well, are polls getting created? Do people sign up for the subscription and this kind of stuff? Yeah, back then we already had subscription tiers, but these were like the most important parts, and they were tracked mainly in the back-end data, right? But the analytics, front-end analytics was, well, a very rough skeleton of Google Analytics, where we would not be very much able to see user behavior. For one, because Google Analytics was a wrong tool, but also for two, because we were not tracking a lot. And third, the majority of the things, the majority of the events we would be tracking, we wouldn't even know what they would be tracking. We didn't know what they're doing because those people who built it in left the company, and nobody knows what those events actually do. So that was kind of the situation.
Wow. It's hard to imagine like a company getting to a pretty successful, a pretty good place in the tech world, where a lot of other companies aspire to be. Basically, maybe half blind is an exaggeration, but not having essential insights throughout the user journey. So yeah. Tell us or more about the project that you were focusing on. What was your task? What was it about? And what did you do? Like, how can you get started?
Yeah. So the thing is, I worked at two major initiatives there. The first one was actually rebuild the checkout together with a designer. And it's a funny thing to rebuild something if you don't know if it's going to be successful or not, because you're not tracking anything, right? So basically, instead, we would try, so let's go one step back. In general, one of the first things we had to fix was actually making sure we see some data. So we started figuring out what those events would do that nobody knew what they were doing, really like manually clicking and testing and seeing like, okay, what happens in Google Analytics or actually in Tag Manager when I click this? Oh, okay. And that you always have to wait, right? Because it doesn't appear immediately. So really finding out what those events were doing, then also add events where necessary to understand what is happening today. And at the same time, figuring out how we can actually leverage backend data. And when you have to rebuild the checkout, it's a very sensitive part of everything, right? So let's say, luckily, it was the checkout for the subscription part, and the free Doodle was way more in use than the premium part of Doodle back then. So therefore, it was not too risky, but that was one of the things to change, right? To make sure that the checkout works well, so that it's easy for people to actually buy the subscription if they want it. And so what we did do for that is we did a lot of qualitative things, so a lot of user testing and so on, to make sure that at least the usability is fine, so that we get qualitative feedback about what we were building before we were building. And we had at least the numbers as in checkout started and checkout ended. Even these were not super reliable because the back-end data would say something else than the front-end data. So we had to pick our source of truth, whether it was really the truth or not, right? But in that state, when you do not have enough or not have one single reliable tool, what you try to do is, instead of looking at absolute numbers, you try to look at relative numbers, so at trends, right? So does the trend go up or down if we change this? So basically, we had to make sure that in the end, the trend of the conversion rate of the checkout ended, right? That this at least stays stable. That would already be a good sign. So when you redesign the checkout, the worst thing that you want to do is moving the conversion numbers down, right? So at least that was an indication.
Do I infer that this means that you iteratively changed the checkout process, like not one big overhaul, but changing small elements in there and observing how these change, the trend evolves?
We did do a big bang, so we changed everything at once. We had to do that because we were replacing also the back-end system behind the subscription and billing service and so on and so forth. So we had to do a big change anyways. But the pieces of the big change, we did that with user testing to make sure we don't just design something and then nobody wants it, but at least with some qualitative feedback. Okay, let's see this part. Does it work well? Does the user understand how to go through it, and so on and so forth. So at least that part. And then we replaced the checkout, and then there were several workovers over the checkout. That was not my part anymore. So somebody else, we had a growth team then, a growth product manager and growth team. So they took over the checkout as well. And then they iterated on it and so on. Because after that, I moved into my second big part, which was leading the new business scheduling solution initiative. So basically finding and implementing new tools for the business suite.
Cool. Let's focus a little bit on the analytics part. I think it's very intriguing. Can you give us a ballpark of how long it took you to fix analytics, have some sort of a reporting that was reliable and useful to make product decisions?
Let me think. So it depends on what you look at. So I mentioned you have front-end data and back-end data, right? So when you have front-end data, this is actually quite easy to fix, relatively quite easy to fix if you look at it as a silo, as just like only front-end analytics, because you just start implementing events and the tracking starts and so on and so forth. And then you see if they're firing at the right or wrong place. So fixing that, I'm careful to make it work somehow with Google Analytics, let's say, I think it was a couple of months, but it also meant that we would just add new events, and we had to remove some events, but we didn't. And so we had to make sure nobody looks at those events and that kind of thing. So, and then considering that we were rebuilding the whole data infrastructure, that also meant we had a data engineer, we had data scientists who would really work on creating a data lake with having the back-end data in, having the front-end data in, and so on and so forth. And for some time, we used Metabase so that we, product people, would be enabled to have access to backend data as well. And when I say backend data, this is typically what you can find in a database, right? So any analysis that you can run on the database level. All in all, and to have the first connections to business numbers as well, because you want to see the end-to-end view, right? So how do they connect to business numbers? If I'm not mistaken, I might be mistaken through, memories and so on. If I'm not mistaken, it took us almost 2 years.
Okay, so that was the big chunk of the work, the front end. It's overseeable. I guess a very important part of let's focus on the front end part for a second. A very important task was for someone, potentially you, to think through what do I want to learn from data, and which events do I need to track where to learn these things. Do you have like some sort of a framework for these kind of, and we can also like just say there's a blank sheet, Here's a new startup. They're getting some traffic. How do you, in what framework should you think about creating new events to learn the things you want to?
Sure. So that's a hot potato, actually. Not only a hot topic, it's a hot potato. Nobody wants to touch
I
that
didn't.
topic.
You can say pass if it's too hot.
No, it's fine. Let's talk about this because it pops up again and again. And the thing is, and we did that too in the beginning, and I think it's a mistake in the end, to basically track everything, because we think, okay, what if at one point in the future we actually want to analyze this and that behavior and see what other behavior led to this or whatever, right? So, and it's kind of a fear of missing out. And if you have this data FOMO, then it actually drives you to basically track everything, right? Problem with that is it's data pollution at the same time. For you, mentally, it's the backlog effect, right? If you have a backlog of 10,000 items, it's rather paralyzing than actually enabling you to do something, right? And it has a similar effect on you because you have so much data. Where should you actually start? And this is one thing. The other thing is it's actually also environmentally a pollution, right? This is space is energy is bad for environment. Then the other thing is you can get so granular that it becomes ridiculous, and in a negative way, right? So basically people, when we are humans, when we try to justify something, we will find our ways. And if a stakeholder tries to justify something, they will also find their ways. And we will find our ways against the stakeholder as well. So the more data you have, the more possibilities you get to become creative to justify your way. So therefore, my advice is actually everything starts with a customer journey. If you as a company, that's a very general rule of thumb, don't have a customer journey plotted out in a way that everybody understands it, that's the first thing that you have to do anyways. Create that and then identify the most important paths. And for this path or these paths, track the conversion steps. That's the main thing that you need to know. If there's something particularly interesting, for example, let's give a negative example. I don't care if we have a drop down, let's say, that selects the color. If I don't care if anyone used that drop down, because I can see in the order of that item that color red was selected. So why do I need to see if anyone uses that drop down? On the other hand, if I want to understand if, for example, real example, if the widget on the product detail page to select the number of items you want to add to cart on that product detail page, if I want to understand if that has any impact on the number of items you buy in the end, then it's worth tracking in the space of a test. And after that, you can still throw it away again, right? So if you want to have that comparison.
This was extremely valuable and helpful. Let's shift to the phase when you already started compiling data. What was your method of gaining confidence that you're tracking valid and real data and real events? Was it a concern at all that you had?
Not regarding the data itself. Well, okay, no. In the very beginning, when we realized we have so many sources and each of them say something else, we were super concerned. We were like, oh my God, which one should we follow? Which is the one that is most reliable? Rule of thumb, if you have any backend data that tells the same as the front-end data, the backend data is the more reliable data, so you want to go with that. But if there is something that you cannot track in the backend and you have to track it in the front end, then again, you do not want to argue too much about the absolute numbers, but more about the relative numbers. And there are two motions. So one stream says, if you cannot rely on any of your sources, then do not use any of your sources. And then there's the other stream that says, well, if you cannot rely on your resources, then make sure you track the trends, because these in that moment become more important than the absolute numbers. I think I'm repeating myself, right? I'm sorry for that.
But that's a very important message. And you also mentioned that you did some usability tests and some experiments. So let's shift away a little bit from analytics and fixing analytics, because your other source of insights were from a qualitative nature. What kind of experiments did you run, and how did you end up selecting these ones and not different ones?
That's a very, very interesting space to be, actually, to run experiments to get data that informs your decision, right? And in that sense, data becomes also qualitative data, right? So anything that helps you make informed decisions instead of wild guesses. And one form of that is, of course, talking to users, right? So if you don't know where to start, talk to users. And second thing, plot the user journey. And or maybe the other way around. And so especially in the case where I was building new products, what was very important is fake tests. So anything regarding fake door tests, anything regarding feedback loops, these were very important. Some examples of that. So our CPO back then had together with our head of customer support, they had set up a Airtable with an automation that would pull in text, which was feedback from Zendesk, into the lines. And also there was another source. I don't remember what other source. I think email was it. Email and Zendesk. And it would basically feed this Airtable with feedback and feature requests, and so that we or I could actually go through the feedback and see which feature was requested most often, which pain was mentioned very often, so that we can take we could take these a step further and think about, okay, what's happening here? Why are they actually requesting this feature? So that we could then actually look at the product itself. Also talk to the people. It's a feedback loop, right? So we would get back to them and ask, like, okay, you requested that, what's happening? Tell us more. And then we would understand what was not working, and then we would figure out what the solution for this would be. And while doing so, you create hypotheses. Actually, you create assumptions, right? We think that this is happening. We think that people try to do this. We think that this could be a solution for that. And what you try to do is actually run experiments to understand if this is a real thing, one. And the second is if that's the right solution for this real thing, right? So learn and confirm. You learn, validate if your learning is right, and then you try to find a solution and validate that solution as well. Learn, confirm. And one thing, for example, that we did is we had a feature request coming through that form for a preview feature. So I was working on something that we called Doodle one-on-one and bookable calendars. I think bookable calendars have a different name today. So this is like, again, 2017 until 2019, right? So things have changed a lot, and I don't know how they are working today, but I think they are calling it booking pages now. And back then, when I was working on those, people were trying to send themselves an email and wrote us why they cannot do that. And we're like, why are they trying to do that? And with a bit of a back and forth, we figured out they actually want to see how that works for their recipients, right? So when their guests receive this email, they want to know how it actually flows for them and
they
how
wanted
it looks
to test
like.
it.
Exactly, okay. But it was a very big feature to build. So what we did was we did a factor test. We had a button that would say, email me the preview. And then when people would click, we would count the click and then show a pop-up saying, like, sorry, this feature doesn't exist yet. We're evaluating it. We count this as your vote for the feature. Thank you very much. And now here's a risk. What we did not do is do a follow-up test to confirm that is really what they wanted. But in the end, it was a gut feeling that told us, actually, it makes sense because, you know, with a normal Doodle poll, you can do the same. You can have a preview. With other similar scheduling tools, you can have a preview. That makes sense, right? And then we had a 36% of clicks on that button. And our hypothesis was, if 10% click on it, like 5 to 10, we are pretty sure that there's something into it. But like 36% was like, okay, damn, we really have to build it. And then because it was such a big feature, we split it into sub-features until we got there to have a full preview.
Amazing. So if I can paraphrase the story, you like notice the problem, this ability to see what the end users will see from like Zendesk tickets, and then to make sure that there's like a significant and representative portion of Doodle's customer base is interested in that, you ran the fake door test, and this was like the final stamp, so to say, of approval to actually build it and make sure it's not just a few loud, unsatisfied customers who submit these tickets.
And so, exactly, and sometimes you have to be following your gut based on the input that you get. For example, one thing, and sometimes it is business driven, right? So what you're trying to do is sometimes business driven. One thing that we wanted to do is that people share the link to those calendars, maybe Doodle 101, maybe Bookable Calendar, that they invite people inside of the tool, so that the tool Doodle would send an email to those people, right, to those guests, and they would have to go through the Doodle experience to actually book a meeting with that person. But we noticed that the majority of the people would not invite others, but they would click the copy link button. And we did not track the copy link button in the first place. So we added that because we wanted to know what's happening and so on and so forth. And then we had this Airtable list, as I mentioned, right? We had some sort of a heat map of the features or problems that were mentioned by the customers. And there was a very hidden one. It was saying, add a personal message. We did not know where, what, and then we were like, okay, that's the personal message before you invite somebody, right? That's a very easy thing to do. Let's just try it out and see what happens. And it was very much on the bottom. It was like 3 people or something, or maybe even 2 people, and one of them mentioned it twice or something like that. And then we just built it because it was something easy to try out. And boom, the ratio of people who would click the button versus invite people changed from 1 to 4 to 1 to 2. And sometimes it's that, right? So basically making data-informed decision always means also do a after launch analysis, right? So your job is not finished when you've launched it. Your job is finished when after the launch, you have analyzed what's going on and made a decision what to do with it. Pivot, persevere, or kill, right? Then is your job done with that feature.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a last question for you, and then I'd like to hand over to the audience. I already see a couple of questions in the chat. I urge everyone to pick Büşra's mind. She's here for you. So pose your most difficult questions or any questions that are on the top of your mind, and let's have them dissected. The question that I wanted to ask you in the very end is that you're sort of in the team that you worked in, you brought in a new way of working, how you treat data and how you treat experiments. And I'm curious how this approach propagated in Doodle, and if it got implemented by other teams as well.
Yeah, sure. So basically, all the kudos here really go to the CPO and the whole team, because changing the way you work only works when you have management support, right? And when your CPO is the one who's pushing for it and who says, look, we can't work this way, we have to change it, then it's way easier than you trying to work against windmills, right? So basically, we all went through this journey. It's not just me, and we all gave our input to it in what to do, how to do it, and so on and so forth. The growth team, the PM back then, she was amazing. She would, only like if you ask me, she had the most difficult job of us all because she had to work with numbers, with like metrics, like really hardcore metrics, hardcore growth and conversion metrics, which is super difficult to work with if you are just in the phase of building that database actually up, the infrastructure up, right? This is super difficult to act like that in this kind of an environment. So if you ask me, she had the toughest job there. Then of course, like the team that was working on classic Doodle, like the Doodle poll team, they also had to first build up the data to work with it, right? So it was amazing. You have to, in order to understand if your changes were successful or not, you always have to compare to last month, last year, and so on and so forth. Like last week is a small comparison. You actually need to understand what's happening throughout the year and then year over year to understand if it was really impactful. And they didn't have that data, right? Because we just started to build it up. So it was really tough. And I think in the end, we all did a good job in bringing our own strength into it. Data was one part of it. We basically, in the end, altogether changed the way how we had built products, right? So bringing in discovery. I personally advocated a lot for doing more qualitative discovery, got a training in jobs to be done discovery, another designer as well. So we hired designers who are very good in research and customer research and so on. And we would do a lot with that as well. We had a big legacy system of a big monolith, and we were not able to release every second week. We were not, so we had to break that up. So we had to build it all from scratch to get it to a point like 2 years later where we could actually, so I could always call it some sort of a junior product-led company, right? So it took us 2 years to change everything so that we could actually make customer market data-informed, insights-informed decisions at all. And again, it also depends on the tools that you use, right? So we, for example, replaced Google Analytics with Amplitude. And my long-term followers know that I love Amplitude. And there's a reason. And that is because of that time back then. And I, for example, my husband's a data scientist. He wrote me a tool that I could use to run cohort analysis because Google Analytics was not able to do that back then, right? So I would do cohort analysis based on a tool that my husband wrote that I was allowed at work to use, that had to be on my work laptop and so on and so forth, which is fine. But this kind of ways. If you want to change, it's not easy, but it's possible.
Thanks a lot. With that, let's move on to the question, and let me throw this first question from Paul on the board or screen to you, and I let you read through it.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I answered that question already. I think create an added value for business customers. Yeah, so I think I mentioned it once, right? So be careful with what you want to track. It's a trap. So data FOMO leads to a data trap kind of thing. And then in the end, you have more than enough data. And you also need to be very careful with privacy and GDPR related topics when you measure so much. So again, my advice would be to only measure what's important and also do some data retrospectives, as in, is there anything that we haven't used at all the last X months, depending on your situation, the last 3 months, 6 months, whatever, maybe the last year, then you can also remove it, right? So you have all the right to remove events and lose data. Not always possible in every situation. I worked in a company where our BI colleague really insisted in not releasing anything without any tracking. So everything that we would release had to have an event attached to it. And that's another extreme. So it really depends on your company and your situation, and how much influence you have.
Cool, got it. And thanks a lot for also covering how to bring it up, because a lot of I assume, like in building on Paul's question, a lot of people find themselves like joining a company where it's already abundant data available, too much, and then how do you get rid of some of the noise that are in there? And for that, your suggestion was to do this data retrospectives. Did I catch the phrase properly?
I just invented a new word. Yeah,
I like it. I like it.
I think Amplitude calls it data audit. Right, so do data audit.
Okay. Let's move on to the question of Maggie. When she's asking about valuable sources and resources.
Ooh, to be very honest, I had to learn it the hard way, because back then when I transitioned, there was hardly anything about digital product management. I think Inspired was out there, maybe. I'm not sure. I didn't read it back then. And there was Roman Pichler, whose material helped me understand the digital world better. So that was the only source that I had. The rest was really trying things out. Today, there's a lot of material. Really, I would say start with Inspired, being aware that it creates an idealistic scenario in your mind, how good product management looks like. It's not 100% applicable in the real world, but at least you know then in which direction it could go. And then the truth is somewhere in the middle, basically, if you want it this way.
Yeah. And the author of Inspired is Marty Kagan. And I just listened to a recent podcast, and Lenny's podcast with him, because his third book just got released. It's called Transformed. He has like a new take on his concepts previously, and some updates. So that's also like a good listening that I can recommend on top of reading his books.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have a question from Deanne about qualitative research methods.
Oh, now I have to open a big toolbox. There are different streams in that. So the very latest and easy to start with stream is the opportunity solution tree, like everything that Teresa Torres describes in her book, Continuous Discovery Habits. And in her book and her trainings, you can learn how to run story-based interviews and how to create an opportunity solution tree to, first of all, find the opportunities. In the end, when you think of design thinking, it's the left part of the double diamond. So the left part is called problem space. The right part is solution space. And it's about opening up the problem space, then learning about it, learn and confirm, like learning about the problem space, then confirming one of the problems is worth solving, and then opening up the solution space, learning about the solution space, and then focusing on one solution to validate if that's the right solution for the problem you have picked. So there's this one area of exploratory research to find opportunities. Then there is jobs to be done research. There are two streams of jobs to be done research. It's, if you ask me, completely unnecessary, but there are two streams. And basically, it's the understanding of finding out what's the reason behind what the user is trying to do. The famous example here is when you drill a hole in the wall, it's not your goal is not to drill that hole in the wall, but your ultimate goal is to actually hang something on the wall, right? So it could be through hammer and nail. It could be through a screw in the hole. It could be just strips. It could be not hanging anything because you can just, put it somewhere on a shelf. So what is the real job behind the action that people do? What are they actually really trying to achieve? And it's usually something like maximize the time that I do XYZ, minimize the time that I need for doing XYZ. I don't know, this kind of things, right? So maximize, minimize, verb, whatever. And yeah, so there was lots of theory material around that. So these would be like the two main pieces, and the third piece would be my recommendation to basically read almost any book that Strategizer has released. It's all about business models and understanding the customer pains, gains, jobs, how your product is actually a full offer within a business model. And it's very, very important for product managers to understand that and to make sure you have the business narrative as well and the business view as well, while building your features even, right? So if your feature doesn't create any value, you don't have to, in that whole systemic business model, then you don't need to build it. And Ash Mariah's Running Lean book, that also gives an idea into the whole space of when you build new products, especially, how you make sure you find problem solution fit in the very first place, and then also product market fit. Well, both are into the direction of product market fit, right? Yeah, so these would be my main go-to points, which are already a lot. It really depends on what you're trying to do.
Yeah,
I have a last material today.
Yeah. I have a last question, and you may have seen it in the chat. It alludes or covers the job to be done, which you just covered partially. Why don't we focus on the second part, if you've been able to figure out how to do this effectively?
Effectively, no. So again, there are two streams. So either you use it, that's the very practical point of view, right? So the Berliner saying, I don't care what the theory behind really wanted, but what I, in my practical experience, have found useful. Yeah, disclaimer over. That's a disclaimer. So I found useful to use Bob Moestra's theory of jobs to be done, or his stream of running jobs to be done interviews, to actually understand the whole buying journey, because the people don't buy something because they had just the inspiration right now in this second, but actually there's a story behind. There's a reason why this person in this context bought that product. So basically, the book editor she mentioned, thank you, Akash. So basically, there is a story behind why people buy that in that context, and his work helps you understand that. This way, it really helps a lot with marketing as well, with positioning as well, and basically wording. And wording is also one part of the product management toolbox that you might need to be able to handle well. The other stream is Ulrich's stream that basically focuses on outcome-driven innovation, where he way deeper goes into the question of this journey. What is the customer actually trying to achieve with the thing that they are doing right now, and actually filtering these mini jobs, right? Understanding those mini jobs, minimize blah, maximize blah, and so on and so forth. And then based on that, you can run an analysis to do an opportunity scoring, which is basically trying to understand, how satisfied are you with the way you're doing X today, and how important is that? And then you can plot it to a graph and decide what to work on and what not. Now, the hands-on experience thing, the first one worked very well for us to understand, and that's also what we did at Doodle, to understand why people are using Doodle and what they're actually trying to achieve, which helped with iteration, as in it informed, okay, if we build this feature, it's not going to help them to do X, Y, Z. And actually, 2 years ago, they had this thought that they might want to book a meeting only with one person. So why are we overloading them with all those options, right? So it helped us understand the context, let's say, in which people are, so that we can decide if that feature is useful or not for that context. The other one, I haven't used rigorously the other method. What I find very helpful with that other method is really when your product is trying to niche down on a very specific use case, then this helps you when you plot the steps, what they're really trying to achieve. Then it helps you to focus on one of those steps and be like, okay, we will fix this step, right? With our feature or our product, we'll fix this step because they're trying to maximize whatever. It kind of becomes the outcome that you're working towards. And separately from that, also the opportunity scoring I find very, very helpful. Even if you have 12 customer interviews and you ask these 2 questions and have those points, right? Even that helps you as an indication. You don't, even if you don't do the full spectrum of having lots of data points, which would of course be better, but not always possible in the real world, right? So even having those answers in a qualitative way helps you to have an indication where to go.
For sure. Thanks so much for the stories, for the wisdom and the practical advice. We made a recording of this session. I'm gonna publish it on Airtime's blog tomorrow, so you can go back to any relevant points that you mentioned. There's so much that you mentioned, so I'm sure people will check back in on some of the resources that you pointed out and some of the approaches. It was extremely helpful, and I'm very grateful for that. Also, big thanks to the audience. We got some insightful questions and which allowed us to dig deeper into topics like the job to be done methodology. Couple of things
one thing.
Büşra,
I hope it was not too overwhelming. As detailed as possible, but not to be too overwhelming. So I hope it was kind of especially to the audience, I hope it was the level was okay, because of course there are lots of details, but I hope it was also broad enough that you can apply it to your context as well. So
yeah. If you have any feedback for Büşra on this, you can leave it in the comments. You can add her on LinkedIn and send it to her. Typically, the audience consists of a mixture of product managers, product designers, founders with a good degree of understanding of the topic. But let's see what people say. And a couple of things. Next Wednesday is going to be the last module of Airtime Academy. We're going to focus on continuous research and how to do continuous discovery. And end of the month, I'm going to be talking to the former product director of Hotjar, unpacking a few things and a few learnings and stories, just like we did or I did today with Büşra about Doodle. Thanks for everyone for tuning in, either in the morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on your time zone. And Büşra, I hope to hear a lot from you in the future. I'm following you on LinkedIn, so I appreciate all the content that you put out, and I hope to also see you back in the show.
Yes, my inbox is open for an invite. Thank you everyone for listening, and feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. I try to be as applicable as possible with my content. Sometimes it's not so easy, but I try.
Amazing. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.